It was 1:13 in the morning, and Ethan Carter was lying on his couch, staring at the ceiling like it owed him money. His apartment was small. The radiator clanked every few minutes like it was annoyed to be working. A half-eaten container of lo mein sat cold on the coffee table. And Ethan, 29 years old, was doing what he always did after a bad date, replaying every second of it in his head like a highlight reel of his own humiliation. His phone buzzed. Sophia. Sophia, how'd it go, Ethan? She said. I give off substitute teacher energy, Sophia. Okay, that's actually kind of a compliment, Ethan. She meant it as an insult, Sophia. Sophia. Lol. Ask her if she likes you. Worst she says is no. Ethan snorted and typed without thinking, half joking, half venting into the void the way you do at 1 a.m. when your brain has given up trying to be smart. Ethan. Do you like me? He hit send. 2 seconds later, his stomach dropped through the floor. That wasn't Sophia's thread. He'd been half scrolling, half typing, and somehow, the message had gone to a number he didn't recognize. A contact that must have auto-filled from some group text months ago, a total stranger. No. Ethan sat straight up, thumb hovering over the screen, desperately looking for a delete option that didn't exist. 3 dots appeared, someone was typing. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he could hear it. Please be a wrong number, please be a spam bot, please yes. Ethan stared at the single word like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. He laughed out loud, alone in his empty apartment, because there was nothing else to do. Some stranger, probably a bored teenager or someone messing with a wrong number themselves, had just casually said yes to his fumbled, humiliating question. He was still smiling when the next message came in. Come to my office tomorrow, we need to discuss our relationship. Ethan's smile vanished. What relationship? He said out loud to nobody. He typed back, who is this? No response. He tried calling. It rang twice and went to a generic voicemail with no name. He set the phone down on the coffee table like it might bite him and stared at it for a long time. Across town, in a penthouse office 40 floors above the Manhattan skyline, Victoria Sterling set her phone face down on her desk, exhaled slowly, and allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, a real, unguarded smile. It was, without question, the strangest text message she had ever received, and somehow she had already decided to answer it. Chapter 1, Ethan didn't sleep. By 7 a.m. he'd convinced himself it was a prank. By 8, a scam. By 9, sitting at his desk at Halbrook and Voss Logistics pretending to review shipping manifests, he'd landed on the only explanation that made sense. Somebody's assistant had the wrong number, and some very confused person was going to show up at an office expecting to meet a stranger who wasn't him. You look like you saw a ghost, Sophia said, sliding into the seat across from his desk with 2 coffees, because Sophia Reed had never respected a no visitors during work hours policy in her life. I might have accidentally proposed to a stranger last night. Sophia blinked. I need you to walk that back to the beginning, he told her, all of it. The message meant for her, the wrong number, the single devastating yes, and the demand to discuss their relationship. Sophia's whole face lit up with delighted horror. Ethan, this is the best thing that has ever happened to you. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. You accidentally asked out a stranger and she said yes without hesitation. Do you understand how rare that is? Normal women make me fill out an application. She wants to meet me at an office, Soph. People don't ask strangers to their office. Serial killers ask people to their office. Very few serial killers have their assistants schedule the murder. Before Ethan could argue that this was not, in fact, reassuring, a shadow fell across his desk. A very large, very serious man in a black suit was standing there, hands folded in front of him like a Secret Service agent. Mr. Carter? Every keyboard in a 10-foot radius stopped clacking. Ethan looked up slowly. Depends who's asking. My name is Marcus Dell. I work for Sterling Enterprises. There's a car outside for you. Sophia mouthed Sterling Enterprises at him with an expression somewhere between terror and pure joy. Ethan followed the man outside on legs that didn't quite feel like his own. A black SUV was idling at the curb, longer than his entire studio apartment. He climbed in, and as the city blurred past the tinted windows, one thought looped through his mind on repeat. Sterling, as in Sterling Tower, as in the company on every business channel. As in, he didn't let himself finish the thought. It felt too ridiculous to say even inside his own head. Chapter 2, the elevator to the top floor of Sterling Tower had exactly 1 button, and it required a keycard just to press it. Ethan stood alone in the mirrored box, catching his own reflection multiplied a dozen times, all of them looking equally unprepared for whatever was about to happen. The doors opened onto an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Manhattan that made his stomach flip. And behind a desk, the size of a small boat, sat a woman Ethan recognized immediately, because you couldn't work in this city and not recognize her. Victoria Sterling, 32 years old. CEO of Sterling Enterprises, featured on the cover of 3 business magazines this year alone. Called by half the press in New York, the Ice Queen. She was more striking in person than in any photograph, dark hair pulled back with surgical precision, a charcoal suit that looked tailored to the millimeter, and eyes that assessed him in about 2 seconds and clearly found the assessment underwhelming. She held up his phone. His text was on the screen. "Do you like me? You sent this to me," she said, not a question. Ethan's face went hot. "That was okay, that was a mistake, a genuine, catastrophic mistake. It was meant for my friend Sophia. I swear, I have never in my life sent a stranger a text asking if they," Victoria laughed. It wasn't the laugh Ethan expected from a woman known citywide for her icy composure. It was short and real, and it changed her whole face for exactly 2 seconds before she reeled it back in. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," he sat. "I'm going to say something that's going to sound insane," Victoria said, folding her hands on the desk. "I need you to hear all of it before you react. Okay? I need a boyfriend." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm sorry, I think there's something wrong with my hearing because it sounded like you just said, you heard correctly. You could have literally anyone. He gestured at her at the office at the entire 40-story building. Why would you need a random guy who sends texts to the wrong number?" Victoria's jaw tightened just slightly. "Because that's exactly why I need you. You're not in my world, nobody knows you, nobody can use you against me." "Against you how?" She was quiet for a moment, studying him like she was deciding how much truth he'd earned. "Let's just say my family has opinions about my personal life, and my business rivals have even stronger ones. I'll explain everything if you agree to hear me out over dinner. If you say no afterward you walk away and none of this ever happened." Ethan sat back in the leather chair, completely out of his depth, and said the only thing that felt true. "You do realize I have $400 in my checking account and I once got lost inside my own gym." Something in Victoria's expression softened just barely. "Dinner, tomorrow. Just hear me out." Chapter 3. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices, which Ethan found more terrifying than the woman sitting across from him. Victoria didn't waste time. "My father built this company from nothing. When he passed, the board let me take over reluctantly, and only because I was already running half the departments myself. Some of them still don't think a 32-year-old woman should sit in that chair. My cousin Daniel is one of them. He's smart, patient, and he's been waiting years for me to slip. And a boyfriend fixes that. A stable, respectable relationship makes me harder to attack. Right now, there's a rumor campaign painting me as cold, unstable, incapable of maintaining a relationship, which conveniently makes me look unfit to run a company built on trust. There's a family gala in 6 weeks. If I show up alone again, it gives Daniel and the board exactly the story they want. So I'm a prop, a partner, for 6 months. You'd be paid generously, and in return you attend events with me, meet my family, let people believe we're together." Victoria's voice was steady, businesslike, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this pitch in the mirror. "No physical expectations beyond what's needed to be convincing in public. It ends when I say it ends, cleanly, no strings." Ethan almost laughed. "This is insane. I'm aware. I don't even know your favorite color." "Slate gray." "Yours? I don't know. I've never been asked that in a business proposal before." For the second time, Victoria's carefully composed mouth twitched toward a smile before she caught it. "Is that a no?" "That's a very firm no," Ethan said. "I have a job, a weird, boring, low-paying job, but it's mine, and I'm not going to go pretend to date a CEO for $200,000, Victoria said. For 6 months, Ethan's mouth went dry. He thought about his rent, his credit card balance, the number he tried not to look at on his banking app. "Still no," he said, and hated how much it cost him to say it. 3 days later, his mother called him crying, and the word surgery came out somewhere in a sentence about her heart. "And we don't have the money, and don't worry about me, sweetheart." Ethan sat in his car outside the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before he called the number Victoria had given him. "I'm in," he said, "but I have conditions." "I'm listening." "You cover my mother's surgery directly. Not through me, and you don't get to treat me like an employee. If I'm doing this, I want to be a person in the room, not a prop in your photos." There was a pause on the line. "Agreed." Chapter 4. "No," Victoria said, for what felt like the 40th time. "You're holding the champagne flute like it insulted your family. It's a glass, Victoria, not a chalice. You're going to be photographed holding it. Hold it by the stem." They were in her penthouse, and Ethan had never in his life felt so aggressively supervised. Victoria walked him through the difference between a business handshake and a "we're dating" handshake, which apparently involved slightly more eye contact and slightly less enthusiasm. She corrected the way he said the word portfolio. She made him practice small talk with her assistant, Priya, who played the role of a nosy board member with alarming commitment. "Tell me about yourself, Ethan," Priya said in a clipped, theatrical voice. "I work in logistics." "Boring," Victoria interrupted from the couch. Say something that makes people like you're funny. Use that, you think I'm funny. Don't get used to compliments, try again. By the third night of lessons, something had shifted. Ethan kept accidentally making her laugh, really laugh, the kind that snuck out before she could stop it, like the night he attempted to waltz and stepped directly onto her foot, then apologized to the foot itself. Victoria kept catching herself watching him a beat too long before remembering to correct his posture. "You're impossible," she said one night, only half annoyed, pouring them both a glass of wine that Ethan held correctly by the stem. "You hired impossible, I came with the territory." For the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, Victoria Sterling felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly, just enough to notice. Chapter 5, the restaurant was called Aveline, and it was the kind of place that had a 2-year wait list for people who weren't Victoria Sterling. The moment they stepped out of the car, camera flashes went off like a wall of lightning. "Don't look at them," Victoria murmured, sliding her hand into his. Her fingers were cold and gripping a little too tight. "Look at me." "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked, genuinely surprised. "I don't get nervous. Your hand is shaking." "It is not." It was. He held it a little tighter, and something about the gesture, steady, uncomplicated, no agenda behind it, made Victoria's shoulders drop half an inch. Inside, over a dinner that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, he made her laugh twice. Once at his own expense, describing his first disastrous internship, and once at hers, when he pointed out that she ordered her steak with the same unwavering authority she probably used to fire people. "I don't fire people over steak preparation. You fired the sommelier's suggestion in under 4 seconds. That was a bad Malbec." By the time they left, the photographers were still outside, and Victoria, on instinct or performance, Ethan genuinely couldn't tell which, laced her fingers through his and smiled for the cameras. "Smile," she whispered. "I'm trying not to faint," Ethan whispered back. By morning, the photo was everywhere. "Who is Victoria Sterling's mystery boyfriend?" read one headline. Sophia sent him 17 texts in a row, the last of which just said, "You're famous now. I'm charging you rent for my silence." Chapter 6. The Sterling family estate in Westchester looked like something out of a period drama, complete with a butler who didn't blink once during the entire evening. Dinner was a minefield. Victoria's aunt asked pointed questions about Ethan's background. Her uncle asked what his 5-year plan was, in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer would disappoint him. And Daniel, tall, composed, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, watched Ethan like he was cataloging him for later use. "So Ethan," Daniel said smoothly, swirling his wine, "how exactly does someone in logistics end up dating the CEO of Sterling Enterprises?" "We met through a mutual miscommunication," Ethan said, and Victoria's foot found his under the table, a warning. "How romantic," Daniel said in a tone that meant the opposite. The aunt leaned forward. "I do hope you understand what you're stepping into, dear. Victoria's world isn't for everyone. Some people simply aren't built for it." Something in Ethan snapped, quiet and clean. "With respect," he said, setting down his fork. "Victoria built a company that employs thousands of people. Kept it running through a leadership transition most CEOs twice her age would have buckled under. And she's done it while every person at this table apparently spends more time questioning her choices than supporting her. I think she's exactly built for it. I think the only question is whether the rest of you are built to respect that." The table went silent. Victoria's mouth had fallen slightly open. Daniel's smile thinned into something colder. "Well," he said, "he's got spirit." Later in the car, Victoria stared out the window for a long time before she spoke. "Nobody's ever done that before." "Done what?" "Defended me. Like that, like it wasn't a performance." "It wasn't," Ethan said quietly, and Victoria didn't have an answer for that, which was somehow more honest than anything she could have said. Chapter 7, Marcus Whitfield showed up at a charity gala 3 weeks later, looking exactly like the kind of man who dated a CEO before and never quite gotten over losing the title. "Victoria, you look incredible as always." He kissed her cheek, lingering a half-second too long, his eyes cut to Ethan. "And you must be the logistics manager everyone's talking about." "Ethan Carter." He didn't offer his hand. "Marcus and I dated for 2 years, Victoria said flatly before Marcus could frame it any other way. "Long enough to know she doesn't do casual," Marcus said, smiling. "So this must be serious." "It is," Victoria said, sharper than necessary, and slipped her arm through Ethan's. Marcus didn't take the hint. He found Ethan alone near the bar 20 minutes later. "You know this doesn't last, right? Victoria doesn't do commitment. She'll get bored of the novelty eventually, and you'll go right back to whatever ordinary life you climbed out of." Ethan felt something hot climb up the back of his neck, but he kept his voice level. Maybe she just finally figured out what she doesn't want. He walked away before Marcus could respond, and found Victoria watching from across the room, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on her face. "What did he say to you?" she asked later in the car. "Nothing important. Ethan, he said you'd get bored of me eventually." Ethan looked out the window. Are you bored? I mean, Victoria was quiet for a moment too long. Then, were you jealous of him? What? No, you're a terrible liar. I am not jealous of a man named Marcus who says incredible, as always unironically. Victoria's laugh came out before she could stop it, and she leaned her head back against the seat, smiling at the ceiling of the car in a way that had nothing to do with performance at all. Chapter 8, it happened on her balcony, 40 floors above the city, after a long, exhausting week that had worn both of them thin. The lights of Manhattan spread out below them like something out of a dream neither of them had asked to be living. Can I ask you something real? Ethan said. Not for the cameras, not for the contract, just real. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself against the wind. Okay, why'd you actually say yes that first night? You could have ignored a wrong number text from a total stranger. Instead you replied in about 4 seconds. She was quiet for a long moment. Because it was the first time in years someone asked me something without wanting anything from me first. Everyone in my life wants something, a deal, a favor, a photo, a decision that benefits them. You just asked if I liked you. It was stupid and small and it made me laugh and I hadn't laughed at anything in months. That's not stupid, Ethan said quietly. I built walls for a reason, Ethan. My father used to say feelings were a liability in this family. I believed him for a long time. Do you still? She looked at him and something in her expression cracked open, unguarded in a way he'd never seen. I'm not sure anymore. They were closer now than they realized, the space between them shrinking without either of them deciding to close it. Ethan could see the exact moment she stopped thinking about anything strategic at all. They leaned in, an inch away. Victoria pulled back, breath unsteady. This isn't part of the contract. I know, Ethan said softly. I don't know what it is. Neither do I, he admitted. But I don't think I want it to stop being whatever this is. Victoria didn't answer, but she didn't step away either. Chapter 9, Daniel Sterling had not survived 12 years in corporate politics by being patient for no reason. He'd been patient because patience applied correctly always found the crack. Ethan Carter's crack was easy to find. No trust fund, no connections, modest college, mediocre job, and most usefully, a mother whose medical bills had been quietly paid off around the same time Ethan started appearing in tabloids on Victoria's arm. Daniel smiled at the printout on his desk. It wasn't proof of anything illegal. It didn't need to be, it just needed to look bad. 2 days later, the story broke. Sterling's CEO's boyfriend received 6-figure payment, gold digger or fake romance. Ethan's phone didn't stop buzzing for 6 hours straight. Reporters showed up outside his apartment. His manager at Halbrook and Voss called him into a private meeting that ended with a temporary leave of absence. Neither of them believed was temporary. Sophia showed up with 2 coffees and murder in her eyes. I will find whoever leaked this and I will end them. It's true, Soph, the money's real. The context isn't. There's a difference between a gold digger and a guy who took a deal to save his mother's life. Nobody's printing that part. Ethan sat on his couch, phone buzzing uselessly beside him, and felt the ground shifting under a relationship he hadn't fully admitted, even to himself, had become real. Chapter 10, the board meeting was called within 48 hours. 6 members sat around the long glass table, Daniel among them, wearing an expression of carefully rehearsed concern. The optics are untenable, said one board member. A financial arrangement behind a public relationship, it undermines everything we've built around your image, Victoria. We're asking you to end it, publicly. Today, Victoria stood at the head of the table, spine straight, voice level. No, the room went still. Victoria, I said no. She looked around the table, meeting every set of eyes, including Daniel's, which flickered with something close to alarm. Ethan Carter isn't my employee. He's not a liability. He's the man I chose, and whatever began as an arrangement between us stopped being one a long time ago. If this board wants to spend its energy scrutinizing my personal life, instead of the person leaking private financial documents to the press, then I think we have a much bigger problem than my relationship. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nobody else at the table noticed. Victoria did. She left the meeting and drove straight to Ethan's apartment, where she found him sitting on the front steps, unshaven, exhausted, and completely unprepared for her to be standing there. You didn't have to do that, he said. Defend me, it's not good for you politically. I didn't do it for politics, Victoria said. I did it because it's true. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something in his chest turning over slow and warm. He realized with a kind of quiet certainty that whatever this had started as, she wasn't acting anymore. And neither was he. Chapter 11, he found it by accident. Victoria had asked him to grab a folder from her home office for a call she was late for. And in reaching for it, a different folder slid off the shelf and spilled across the floor. Ethan knelt to gather the papers back together and stopped cold. Fake relationship agreement, confidential, Party A, Victoria Sterling. Party B, Ethan Carter. Term 6 months, compensation $200,000 dispersed as agreed. He read it twice. Then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Every date on the timeline was there, the restaurant, the family dinner, the gala. All of it laid out in legal language, planned before he'd ever set foot in her office. Victoria found him standing there, the papers still in his hands, when she came looking for the folder. Her face went pale. "Ethan, I knew about the contract," he said quietly. "I signed it. I'm not upset that it existed." He looked up at her and his voice cracked on the next part. "I'm upset because I forgot it was ever a contract. Somewhere in the last 2 months I forgot, Victoria. And I need to know if you did too, or if I'm the only idiot in this apartment who started actually falling for someone he was being paid to date." Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched unbearable, and it was the silence more than anything she could have said that answered him. "Right," Ethan said quietly and walked out. Chapter 12. Ethan went back to his ordinary life, except it didn't feel ordinary anymore. It felt smaller, quieter, like a coat he'd outgrown and had to wear anyway. He turned down 2 calls from Victoria's number, then 5. Then he stopped counting. Victoria, for her part, became colder than the tabloids had ever accused her of being. Priya said she hadn't seen her smile in 3 weeks. Board meetings ran long and tense. She threw herself into work the way she always had before Ethan, except now the silence in her penthouse felt different. Louder somehow in its emptiness. Neither of them spoke about it. Both of them thought about it constantly. 3 weeks in, Ethan's mother called, confused. "Sweetheart, a moving company just delivered groceries and paid off the balance on the surgery bill I thought we'd settled." "Did you do that?" "No," Ethan said slowly. "I didn't." He didn't need to ask who did. He just didn't understand why not anymore, not after everything. She'd still be quietly taking care of the people he loved without a word, without asking for anything, without even telling him. He sat with that for a long time. Chapter 13. With Victoria distracted and weakened, Daniel moved fast. He'd spent months quietly altering the digital paper trail on a supplier contract, routing a series of transactions to make it look like Victoria had personally authorized a conflict of interest deal that benefited a company her family had old ties to. It wasn't true, it didn't need to be. It only needed to be believable enough for an emergency board vote. "Financial misconduct," Daniel told the board, sliding folders across the table with the calm of a man who'd been rehearsing this moment for years. "I don't take pleasure in this, but the company's integrity has to come first." A vote was scheduled for Friday. Victoria's removal as CEO was, for the first time in her life, a real possibility. Ethan heard about it from Sophia, who heard about it from a friend who worked in Sterling's PR department. He sat with the news for exactly 1 night before he made a decision. He might not love the woman he'd been hurt by anymore. He might never fully forgive the ache of finding that folder. But he knew without question that Daniel was lying, and he knew because he'd spent 6 months learning every rhythm of that company, every name, every relationship in that boardroom, exactly where to look for proof. He called an old contact from his logistics job who'd moved into Sterling's supply chain division and asked one careful question. It was enough to start pulling the thread. Chapter 14. The boardroom was full when Ethan walked in Friday morning. Every head turned. Daniel's expression flickered, surprise, then something more careful. "Mr. Carter," said one board member, "this is a closed meeting. I have information relevant to the vote," Ethan said. 2 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Victoria, seated at the head of the table, looked at him like she wasn't sure she was allowed to hope. She said nothing. She gave a small nod to the room. Ethan laid out the timeline, the shipping records that didn't match Daniel's version of the transaction, the routing changes made under an account with Daniel's access credentials, the timestamps that placed the unauthorized deal squarely within Daniel's control, not Victoria's. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic. It was just true and laid out clearly enough that even the board members who wanted to believe Daniel couldn't ignore it. Daniel's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. He's not even an employee. He has no standing to." "He has documentation," said the board chair flatly, flipping through the pages. "Which is more than you've offered." By the end of the meeting, the vote to remove Victoria had been withdrawn. An internal investigation into Daniel's conduct was opened instead. He left the boardroom pale and silent, his ambitions unraveling behind him. Victoria found Ethan waiting in the hallway outside, staring out the window at the skyline like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to still be there. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Ethan said. "I did it anyway." Chapter 15. They stood there for a long moment, the hallway quiet except for the distant hum of the office. "The first message was an accident," Victoria said finally. "I want you to know that. I never planned any of this, not the text, not you." She took a breath, like she was steadying herself for something harder to say. "But everything after that first message, the contract, yes, that was real, and I'm sorry for it, truly, but everything I felt, Ethan, that was never in the paperwork. Nobody wrote that into an agreement." I fell for you completely on my own, without meaning to, without permission, in a way I've never let myself fall for anyone. So what are we now? Ethan asked quietly. Victoria's eyes were bright, unguarded, none of the Ice Queen left in them at all. Whatever you want us to be. Ethan thought about it, the folder, the silence, the 3 weeks of missing someone he'd been trying not to miss. And underneath all of it, the thing that hadn't gone away no matter how hard he'd tried to let it. Then let's start over, he said. No contracts. No contracts, Victoria agreed. This time when they leaned toward each other, neither of them pulled away. 1 year later, Ethan Carter was not technically a logistics manager anymore. He'd started his own small consulting firm 6 months ago. Victoria had offered to invest, and he'd made her sign an actual, legitimate business contract before he'd say yes, which still made her laugh every time she thought about it. He was standing near the bar at a Sterling Enterprises charity gala, considerably more comfortable holding a champagne flute than he'd been a year ago, when a board member's wife asked him, with polite curiosity, how exactly he and Victoria had met. Ethan smiled. Honestly, I texted the wrong number. The woman blinked. I'm sorry, what? Across the room, Victoria caught the tail end of the conversation, walked over, and slid her arm through his the way she'd done 100 times since, except now there wasn't a single ounce of performance in it. Best mistake he ever made, she said, smiling. Definitely, Ethan agreed. They walked out onto the terrace together, the Manhattan skyline glittering below them the same way it had that first night on her balcony, except this time neither of them was pretending anything at all. The end.